everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Rhett Buttle, Forbes contributor and founder of Public-Private Strategies. Rhett, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
President Donald Trump dubbed April 2nd as Liberation Day, a day where he unveiled his sweeping tariff policy. And since then, global markets have lost trillions, trade wars have escalated, and fears of a recession have dramatically increased. On Tuesday morning, we saw markets start to make somewhat of a rebound, but talk to us about the moment we're in right now when it comes to the fallout from President Trump's tariff announcement.
Yeah, I think if there's one word to describe the moment is uncertainty. And I think the reason is for a few reasons. One is, I think a lot of folks knew that President Trump was interested in tariffs, but I don't think anyone really thought that it would be this drastic. And I think that has just caused a lot of uncertainty across the market. Obviously, we saw that in the stock market over the last few days. It's one of the biggest drops we've ever seen in history. But I think two, pieces that I feel like are not as focused on as much is what does it mean for, small businesses who employ half of all Americans? How are they dealing with this? But also working families. And in a lot of ways, this is a regressive tax that really is going to have an impact on working families across America.
Businesses don't like uncertainty. Economists don't like uncertainty. The markets don't like uncertainty. So what do you think this uncertainty surrounding Trump's tariff plan means for small businesses, for the everyday American?
Yeah, well, clearly we're seeing what happens, in the larger market as the stock market is reacting in a very negative way. We've also seen a number of prominent, institutions and organizations, JP Morgan Chase, Mark Zandi from Moody's, coming out and saying this highly increases the chance of a potential recession. We saw Larry Fink say recently that the business people he talks to say that we might already be in recession. And so I think, the uncertainty really just leads to, quite frankly, a foul mood, right? And, the American economy is a consumer economy, and we want people to be optimistic about the economy. That really drains down into Main Street, right? And so, when consumers are worried, they spend less money with small businesses, and that's not good for small businesses or the people who work for them.
To your point, Mark Zandi said that the chance of the U.S. entering a recession this year is 60%, and the only way it's avoidable if President Trump does find an off-ramp when it comes to these tariffs. When you hear that, what does that really mean for the small businesses of America, hearing that we are more likely to go into a recession than not this year?
Yeah, I unfortunately think that, regardless of what we hear from President Trump going forward, I think a lot of this impact has already taken shape. And I think for a lot of small businesses, they are going to start to shape the decisions they make very differently. Maybe they were thinking about hiring a few employees. They're probably going to hold off on doing that. Maybe they were thinking about making a big purchase. That means that they might hold that back. And then for a wide variety of them who depend on products, they're starting to think about how to retool and reshape their business. Now, some of that is not bad as a long-term strategy. I think as, we saw both in the Biden and now we're seeing in the Trump administration, there's a focus on making things in America. That's an important indicator for small businesses to look at. And that, quite frankly, is a noble goal that can be good for working families. I just think taking a sledgehammer and doing it in such a drastic way like we've done, that shock is really hard on small businesses who just don't have the same ability as large businesses to be able to mitigate some of these. And it really could lead to less hiring. We know small businesses are job creators and they hire folks. So I'm really worried about the downstream effects for Main Street economy.
To your point, I feel like there's this real disconnect between what economists are saying and what President Trump and the White House are saying. Because economists are saying tariffs aren't the way to try to negotiate. Tariffs shouldn't be the way to try to make America first. President Trump says America has been taken advantage for years and that these tariff policies are going to put America and American manufacturing first. Do you think those two things square?
Look, I think there's a noble goal. And as I said before, we saw actually President Biden talk a lot about restoring manufacturing to the heartland of America. President Trump also talks about that. So I think there's some agreement there. The question is, how do we do that, right? And so tariffs are not always a bad idea, but tariffs should be applied sparingly and strategically. versus sort of doing it with, like I said, a sledgehammer. Anytime you're doing something that's going to have wide economic impact, you really want to be surgical about the way you do it and not do it in a very intense way that's going to create ripples throughout the market. And I think, unfortunately, that ripple is going to create a lot of uncertainty. And so should we have a conversation about making sure that families all across America, working families, manufacturing families, small businesses, have access to the livelihoods that they need and the tools they need to be able to do so? Absolutely. The goal is a shared goal, I think, across all political ideologies. The question is how we get there. And I think a lot of folks are worried that this drastic shock is actually going to take us back versus take us forward for working families and small businesses.
I think if you're a working family, if you're an everyday American, no one wants to hear this is going to take us back, especially when the economy was the top issue facing voters in 2024. Tariffs are expected to raise prices and inflation rates, shrink consumer spending and disposable income. You hear that. Let's say you're a small business owner. I mean, how should you be bracing for impact here?
Yeah, look, tariffs are really a tax on working families. Some studies actually show it could end up costing working families $2,000 more a year. Just to make it very tangible for people, I was reading a study today that says it could increase the price of buying a new iPhone by $300. Almost everyone has a cell phone, so imagine if your cell phone is $300 more, or getting your avocados becomes $2 more, right? These are things that people are going to feel. I think for business owners who are thinking about this, I think a few things. One is they should really be communicating. So one is they should communicate with their customers that honestly this policy change has made it challenging, so that their customers can be more patient, but so also their customers can understand the sort of moment that we're in right here. And then I also think business owners should be talking to their policymakers. This is a great time to call up your Congress people, your governors, call up the White House, right? Small business owners are the backbone of our economy. They create 2 out of every 3 new jobs. Their voice is more important than so many voices in Washington, small businesses and working families. So I say communicate about this moment so that policymakers are really hearing that you need certainty in the economy.
It seems like everyday Americans, I haven't heard too much speaking super supportively about the tariffs. Economists don't like these tariffs. The markets don't like these tariffs. I'm curious, who do you think the winners and losers are when it comes to this tariff policy? Because even President Trump, the person who implemented this tariff plan since Liberation Day, less than a week ago, his net worth took a beating. He has lost $500 million in his net worth since April 2nd. So who's the winner? Who's the loser?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said before, I think the goal here is a noble goal, which is the idea of investing in working families, investing in the heartland of our country, investing in manufacturing. I'm not sure broad sweeping tariffs are the way to do that. Unfortunately, I think the winners in this case are non-democratic countries, right? Like this gives China and Russia and countries the ability to go in with our trading partners and say, hey, look, the U.S. wasn't there for you in this moment. Maybe you should do a deal with us. And so I think there's a whole set of actors out there who really benefit from this that is not good either for our economy or, quite frankly, good for our geopolitical relations. It's really important, as we think about our relationship, especially with our closest neighbors like Mexico and Canada, where we have such an intertwined system, that we're thinking holistically about how we create supply chains that work both for our population, but also strengthen democratic countries as we move forward and we try to create an economy that works for everyone.
I think one of the themes from this conversation you and I are having right now is that you wish President Trump and the Trump administration didn't take a sledgehammer here. You wish it wasn't so volatile. The word and term that has been floating around the past couple of days really has been an off-ramp. Do you want President Trump to try to find an off-ramp, and do you think that he's willing to do so?
I think what would be most helpful is to really hear where the end goal is. The president, I don't know him, but, often talks about that he's a deal maker, right? And so I think if we could hear, that there's an end goal, there's a deal to be made, I think that would be good for the markets. We saw a little bit today as some of that is coming out that, there's folks in the Trump administration who are saying deals are being made. So hopefully that's kind of the more immediate relief. But I think, across the board, what we're seeing both with the tariffs and kind of the large scale cuts that are happening to the U.S. government, this dramatic shock is not good for the economy writ large. It's not good for working families. It's not good for small business owners. Do changes need to be made in Washington, D.C.? Do policies need to be better for working families? All of of those things are true. We could all be doing more. We really need to invest in those communities and use the resources we have to invest versus sort of pull back and retrench. And so I think, just being more thoughtful and methodical about the policy and rolling it out sort of in a more strategic way is kind of really, really the answer here in some ways, and making sure that it's policy that's focused on investing in America and America's future versus sort of taking a defensive posture, which pulls us back.
I know the theme, another one in this conversation, is uncertainty. I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball here, but what would you like to see as the Trump administration's next moves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think the uncertainty, as we talked about at the top, is something that's really haunting us. I mean, really understanding the long-term plan, I think, is going to be important here. And so understanding like, hey, yes, we are going to allow countries to come to the table and negotiate, and we're going to try to do better by America through those negotiations. But also having a more broad understanding of the fuller picture, and not just how tariffs is just one piece of economic policy. And quite frankly, it's kind of a non-sexy, non-interesting piece. We're talking about it all the time, but there's so many more important things to think about: investment in communities, tax reform, investing in small businesses, that and really seeing the whole economic picture, I think, would be helpful versus taking this big shock or the sledgehammer, as we're talking about, to the system in this moment.
Do you think that the White House even has a sense of what the long-term plan is? Because an economic advisor to President Trump said this when he was asked if the tariff plan is a, quote, negotiation or the new rules of the game. He said either. So does that really shore up your confidence that the White House has a plan? Because it should be one or the other, and either makes it seem like they're not really sure which route they're taking, the negotiation way, or that this is the new law of the land.
Yeah. Well, as we've talked about, there's the shared goal of really investing in working families and small businesses. And I think there's a potential opportunity for the White House to really bring people together across political divides. And quite frankly, like also our strongest allies, places like Canada and other democratic countries, to say, okay, how do we create a more favorable system that allows us to, A, continue to be leaders on the world on things like AI and national security, chips manufacturing, but also make sure that those policies are really sort of investing at home, right? And so that those things are homegrown and they benefit not only our way of life and our economic productivity, but also our national security. And so if I was sort of speaking to the White House, I think, I would say, hey, look, this could be a great coalition moment. Focus on families, focus on small businesses, focus on our national security and our allies. And I think that's where the opportunity lies.
Everyone has one eye on the markets, another eye probably on President Trump's Truth Social account, seeing where he's going next when it comes to these tariffs. I know that we are in this really uncertain time right now, but what specifically are you looking out for next?
Yeah, I think I am looking for what are those more long-term next steps. We've heard a lot that the Trump administration is thinking about, the tax conversation. I'm watching what's going on in the House and the Senate because, even though everything in the news right now is about tariffs and kind of what the administration is doing, quietly we're seeing a tax package sort of come together, or we're seeing the process of government begin to work for a tax package. I think that and making sure the tax package doesn't work for just a few people in our country, but making sure it works for working families and small businesses is going to be a really important part of the conversation over the next few months. And so I imagine, over the next few weeks, as we continue to talk about tariffs, we'll also start to hear more about taxes. And so I really encourage business owners and business leaders who are looking at the market and look at their own portfolio to also be thinking about the tax conversation that's happening in Washington.
Rhett, I appreciate this conversation today. Thank you so much for your insight. You are welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.